shut the power off and gummed up the works on one of the refineries, and they had to shut it down for 35 days. It cost them $100 million. And so we went up to do a focus group in Sacramento, and I was there for 2 days, and the second day, my throat felt a little bit like yours has recently. I could not breathe. It just felt like my larynx was closing down. And it turned out that the California fires in 2017 had just started while I was out there. And I became transfixed about people. There were 5,500 people whose houses burned down in one night because that utility car started a fire. And of course, you know, Erin likes to tell the joke she's not Julia Roberts. I like to tell the joke that as a red-blooded American male, I grew up loving Julia Roberts. And now I realized I was in love with the wrong woman. So in working on that case, we ended up representing 16,000 people whose houses were burned down by that utility. And I remembered the movie. I said, wouldn't it be cool if we got Erin Brockovich? Nobody's madder at PG&E than Erin Brockovich. And one of my partners, Doug Boxer's around here somewhere, he goes, I know her. I said, well, see if she'll help us. And she, lobbied the legislature and kept PG&E from changing the law. And I really got to respect what she does, and it's an important deal. But then it kind of flipped. She started bothering me all the time. And she started saying, you need to get into this, you need to get into that. And the water quality up here and the forever chemicals, PFAS, you've heard about this. You know, I didn't know how to spell PFAS before Erin Brockovich asked me to get involved in that. And now it seems like half my time's working on that. The Camp Lejeune thing you've seen on TV, you know, they ruined the water at Camp Lejeune, da-da-da-da-da. And so now I spend all my time working on water pollution issues, courtesy of that woman. And so about 2.5 weeks ago, I was working on water pollution cases involving Camp Lejeune and PFAS and the like, and I was working hard, and I started getting these perpetual emails from Erin Brockovich, but they weren't from Erin Brockovich. They were emails from you all to Erin Brockovich begging for information. And what we quickly realized is there were hundreds of them. Hundreds of people emailing Erin saying, what do we do? How do we do it? Da-da-da-da. She kept bothering me. She goes, you got to go to East Palestine. And to be honest with you, my first reaction, where's East Palestine? And she goes, you don't know about the train derailment. And I said, well, I heard something about it. She goes, I want you up there. You got to help these people. And so I started reading. And I started researching and was shocked by what I learned. And so within 6 days, we agreed to come to East Palestine, and we set up the meeting at the high school. And then what happened is that you guys kind of came in bigger numbers than we thought. We filled up the auditorium, which I think seated 500 or 600 people, and then there were 1,000 people that signed up. And so we filled up the gym next door, and we got the wiring, and then that filled up. And then there was a second gym, and some genius that was doing the wiring didn't wire it right. And so the people in the second overflow room couldn't hear us. And that really pissed me off. And so if you were in that second overflow room, I'm very sorry. I really am. Okay? And you are the reason that I'm here again tonight. Okay? My wife last Friday, she says, why aren't you here with me? And I said, because I'm helping people in East Palestine. And then tonight she says, why are you going back? I said, because I screwed up the second overflow room. And these people went and they wanted the information, they couldn't hear it. So I'm here with an apology to you, ma'am. And for the rest of you that weren't there, I'm here with a whole lot of information. Okay? So let me just kind of start off. This is an informational seminar. You got interesting rules here in Ohio that are a little different than most rules I have to deal with, and I'm going to tell you about some of that. But the bottom line is one of the things that I want to talk to you about first is this derailment is a hazard that manifested itself in your life about 30 days ago. I don't care. Anyway, it upended your life about 30 days ago, but the hazard of train derailments is something that we've known about for more than a century. Let me just kind of take you through the most deadly train derailments that have ever happened, at least in the last century. One happened in Mexico, in Guadalajara, killed 600 people in 1915. In Curia, Romania, during World War I, a troop transfer derailed, 800 people dead. In France, 800 people died in another troop derailment. And so we know that these derailments are super dangerous. It wasn't just during World War I. In World War II, 500 people died in a troop transfer in Italy. In the 1980s, in India, 500 people died. In Ethiopia, 428 people died. Over and over and over again, you might be asking a question, yeah, but that's in the third world. That's not something that happens to us here in the United States. Of course, you know better now. But the fact of the matter is the hazard of train derailments doesn't just happen over in Russia and in Ethiopia and the like. We've had it here in the United States. It's a hazard that's been known for a long time. Just in the last 30 years, and I started in 1991 because that is the date when a 31-year-old paralegal named Erin Brockovich started getting the face of PG&E. This is just since Erin's been doing what she's been doing. Out in California, 19,000 gallons of herbicide were dumped into the most pristine river I've ever seen during a train derailment. 1992 up in Wisconsin, 15,000 gallons of benzene, which is a well-known carcinogen that causes leukemia, was released because of a train derailment. In North Dakota, in 2002, 146,700 gallons of ammonia. You know you're not supposed to breathe ammonia, but it was released because of train derailment. In Paulsboro, New Jersey, and I'm going to come back to this one in 2012, a train derailment, 23,000 gallons of vinyl chloride, a chemical that you may be now familiar with, was released about 11 years ago. Want to guess who the train company was? The same one. So there's different reasons for train derailments, and I'm not saying these are all caused for the same reason, but the bottom line is that it puts these companies on notice that this is a hazard, that you have to take special steps. You need to do extra things from the standpoint of safety, particularly when you choose, as a common carrier, to transport the most toxic chemicals ever invented by mankind, like vinyl chloride. You can't take risks when you're transporting vinyl chloride, or things like what happened a decade ago in Paulsboro, New Jersey, will happen. And we'll get back to that, because we've learned a lot. And I've talked to people in Paulsboro that I want to tell you about since last Friday. Tennessee, 24,000, it says deaths. I need to fix that, Tom. Another chemical, it's 24,000 gallons. But the bottom line is the train derailment hazard that we've seen all over the world is a hazard that's manifested itself here in the United States long before it happened to your community. Now, what about Norfolk Southern specifically? To coin a Texas phrase, is this her first rodeo? In the rodeo known as train derailment? Nope. Just picking up some of them. In 2002, 10,600 gallons of sulfuric acid was released into the environment during a Norfolk Southern derailment in Farragut, Tennessee in 2002. In Paulsboro, I've told you about this, with Norfolk Southern, 23,000 gallons of vinyl chloride. In 2018, you know, for a Texan, and you're giving a speech in Ohio, you think Pittsburgh's a long way away until today you land in Pittsburgh and you realize it's right next door. So right next door, fortunately they were carrying Listerine and Pampers, but 46 double-stacked cars and 23 well cars ended up jumping the tracks not 50 miles from here. This is a Norfolk Southern derailment. They know it can happen. They know it happens when they're carrying chemicals, a herbicide, 1.1 million pounds, all sorts of stuff that you know about happen here, and vinyl chloride and the like. So I asked my law lawyers, hey, can you research the cases? Has anybody ever died from one of these Norfolk Southern train derailments? And the fact of the matter is you can go into the lawyer equivalent of Google, we call it Westlaw, and you can type in Norfolk Southern and see reported cases where they've been sued before for derailments. And so we did. My lawyer, Travis Headley, got to work on this, and he found all sorts of cases that then I got to read, and we realized that Norfolk Southern has a long and rich history of derailing trains. And when I say a rich history, they were derailing trains while they were rich. They could have stopped it. And so we read all those cases, and we picked up a bunch of reported cases where they were the defendant, where derailments happened. But I want to talk to you about just one of them. This is the one in Paulsboro. 2012, a decade ago, lawsuit, Viola Scott, who was the daughter of Wessie Hardy, who died right after a train derailed release vinyl chloride into the atmosphere. She breathed it, presented to the hospital, having the same symptoms that you did: difficulty breathing, chest pains, burning, irritation of the eyes, and passed away 4 days later. Her family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Norfolk Southern. Of course, they carry insurance for these kinds of things, and they quietly settle it with confidentiality agreements, and they go on down the track. But this is what, in my business, we call notice. You know that when you're carrying vinyl chloride, that if you do not take safety steps to prevent derailments, people can die. People can lose property values. People can have all sorts of personal injuries like you all have had. And I just Googled her after I figured this out, and there's Miss Wessie Hardy, who gave her life because of what Norfolk Southern has chosen to do in not preventing derailments as it transports vinyl chloride and other highly toxic chemicals across the railroads here in the United States. I talked to a lady from Paulsboro 3 days ago. She says after 12 years, she still doesn't drink the water because she feels sick every time she does. There are all sorts of letters about don't drink the water. So I'm not telling you, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to give you health advice as to whether you ought to drink the water or not. But I do know that this is a little bit like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. Every day at 6:01, he gets up and does the same thing over again. If the people in Paulsboro are still having problems from vinyl chloride release, a much larger vinyl chloride release, where you all are presenting with the same complaints as this poor lady that died, as this other lady that still can't drink the water, tells me that there's going to be issues here. And then I asked my law lawyers, I said, hey, how many times has this company derailed a train? Well, it turns out that the federal government, the Transportation Administration, Pete Buttigieg was here, he's the president administrator, goes Democrat, Republican, like that, but regardless of who's in charge, they maintain databases that say how often this happens. And so we go into the database and we type in Norfolk Southern and the word derailment, and we learn that for the 20 past years, Norfolk Southern has reported 3,397 events that are classified in this database as a derailment. Now, Mama didn't raise the smartest kid, but this kid knows how to divide 3,397 by 20 years. It's almost 200 a year. These guys are derailing a train every 2 or 3 days, if these statistics are right. And of course, we know that at least the week following your derailment, they managed to derail another one in Michigan a week later. I read in the paper coming up here, maybe there was one in Central Ohio a couple of days before. So they're right on schedule. Every couple of days, they're going to jump the tracks. So this is the magnitude of the hazard of train derailments that we know about. So, knowing that they killed this poor lady in Paulsboro, knowing that they've had all of these toxic releases over the last 2 decades, what have they done to prevent the likelihood of derailments before the one that happened to you? Well, we know that in 2012, there were 79 vehicles carrying hazardous materials that were involved in accidents. By 2022, that number had gone up almost 10 times to 770. Why is that so? Because they have a very successful lobby in Washington that fights against any regulations, whether it's safety or not. Now, at the same time, they're saving money by not investing in safety technologies. And there's technologies that you can put on these cars. And there's also a technology that God gave us by it's eyeballs, where you can pay for people to inspect your tracks. You can pay for eyeballs to inspect your cars. You can pay for extra technology. In your case, the extra technology to detect rising heat. As you're going along the track, you either do it every 5 miles or not. And so, did they have enough money to do these safety things? Well, apparently so. As you go to their Form 10-Ks over the last 10 years, the executive who has graced you with his presence The CEO, we know exactly what his yearly bonuses were. We know his compensation structure is tied to certain metrics that include profits. We know that they were able to assemble enough profits that just last year they bought back $10 billion of their own stock in what's called a stock buyback, which is designed to make the stock price go up and so the bonuses get bigger. So they had plenty of money to do it, they just chose not to. So here we go. As the profits kept on rising, safety experts say a focus on financial returns may be partly to blame for the derailments and the accidents like the one in Ohio. No kidding. We've got all the data between 2012 and 2022. How many derailments, how many cars damaged, how many hazmat cars, released chemicals, it's all there. And so as their safety record was deteriorating, their corporate profits and their executive compensation kept going up. And we know that because of what's called a report on Form 10-K. The Securities and Exchange Commission is a publicly traded company. They have to do this once a quarter. And they do an annual report once a year, and they state what their profits are. And it's kind of hard to see, so I've made it bigger. In 2020, they made over $2 billion, and just 2 years later, remember when they had 10 times the accident a decade ago? They managed to get that up to $3.27 billion, an increase of 62%. So they're making plenty of money, enough to buy back $10 billion of stock. And so what happened on February the 3rd? You know, last Friday, I've met with a bunch of lawyers. We're getting everything organized, and I'll tell you all about it. So we came, we went to the site, we did some interviews, we talked to a bunch of people, and then I drove to Canton to meet with some lawyers on your case. And I drove by a beautiful, nice town. You've been there, Salem, Ohio. And there's an outfit by the name of Butech Bliss that has a facility. It's a rolling mill equipment factory, but they also have something called a surveillance video. And their surveillance video camera happened to be pointing towards the track. And so we see that some 20, 30 miles back, one of their cars was on fire. We've since learned that that's a result of what's called a hot axle and plastic pellets in the rail car. And here's the screenshot from that company's surveillance video. And when we make it a little bigger, you can see that way back in Salem, one of their cars is on fire. Okay? Now, I have not been in the rail industry for 50 years. But even me, with my limited experience, understands the idea this ain't good. So what technologies did you employ to tell your crew when something's on fire or that you've got a problem that can manifest itself and lead to a derailment? So we're going to talk about that next. The bottom line is that we've got temperature readings. I'm sorry this is kind of fuzzy. Last week you could read it. But the temperatures are going up every 10 miles by a whole lot. And there's readings that go up, and they can set the temperature above ambient temperature at which they're going to give an alarm to the crew. So since the time that the fire started, the temperature readers, it's a device along the track, are showing an increase in temperature, but the crew is not being told because Norfolk Southern has set the threshold for the alarm to go off so high it doesn't go off until it's like 117 degrees above ambient temperature. And so it's rolling right down the track towards your town while on fire, and apparently the crew doesn't have a clue until they get to some 253 degrees above ambient temperature. And then at that point, the alarm goes off. Now we don't know exactly what the procedures were. There's some indication that maybe there were policies about we don't tell the crew when the alarm goes off. It goes to central casting, but not to the crew. I'm not going to say that happened here yet, okay? The bottom line is at some point the crew finds out they've got a problem. They initiate the brakes, okay? There's a lot of scrum in the paper about the brakes, but the bottom line is that they had a problem from the standpoint of the brakes. And during the deceleration An automatic emergency brake application initiated, and the train eventually came to the stop, but during that brake application, there was another issue that deals with maintenance, and that led to a problem. And if you look at the report of the NTSB, we can see the following. Number one, the initial fire was the result of a hot axle and plastic pellets in the rail car. The detectors that are 30 and 20 miles away didn't record temperatures above Norfolk Southern's alarm threshold, so the crew didn't have a clue. When the train reached the third monitor, a bearing in the 23rd rail car measured 253 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient temperature, well above the critical level, so an alarm went off. Now, who got that alarm, I don't know yet. But the NTSB, the chair of the NTSB, said had there been an additional detector earlier, the derailment may not have occurred. No kidding. Okay, so we got questions about why not more heat detectors. What was the communication rule about when you went above? Why'd you pick the threshold so high? Just tell them whenever it was rising. Okay? All right. So the crew receives a warning at some point, and we'll take their depositions and get all of this, telling them to immediately slow and to stop the train. During the deceleration after they apply the brakes, the rail car wheel bearing fails. So we got maintenance issue number two. Maintenance issue number one is why the fire in the first place. All sorts of process issues about why didn't the detectors set off the alarm earlier so they could stop the train way before it gets to East Palestine. And the third issue is another maintenance issue. What the hell's going on with the rail car wheel bearing failing? The interesting thing is that the NTSB report says there are various causes for these roller bearings to overheat, including 1, fatigue cracking, 2, water damage, and 3, mechanical damage. This is where the budget for the standpoint of inspections means everything. And I'm telling you folks, it's almost like that movie with Robert Redford, All the President's Men, where Deep Throat keeps saying, follow the money. I promise you, I've been doing this for 33 years. Decisions about how often to inspect, what kind of maintenance program, what kind of technology you're going to do, come down to, are you going to spend the money on safety, or are you going to put it in executives' pockets and buy back stocks? It's a choice. And when we get in their file cabinets, we will see the documents with respect to projected profits, anticipated profits, bonuses tied to profit levels, maintenance deferrals, fighting regulation in Washington to keep from having to do things that may cost money, that can prevent something as simple as fatigue cracking, water damage, and mechanical damage, that can cause an application of the brakes not at high speed to cause a train that's over 1.5 miles long to jump the tracks. That should not happen. And so here we are. Now, you've all got a different story, and of course we're going to want to hear that story from each of you. But the tale of the tape is 38 cars derailed. Fire damage an additional 12 cars, according to the NTSB. Here's one of the photographs of the train of fire. This is what you all saw before they made the decision to do what they called a controlled burn of vinyl chloride a couple of days later. Now look, on this controlled burn, anytime there's one of these big events, people want to light up everybody for everything that happened. And it's real important that we not get caught in that. We've got to get to the facts. And the bottom line is, I just want to tell you, I don't know whose call it was. I don't think it was the railroad. I think it was regulatory authorities. Vinyl chloride is extremely combustible, extremely flammable. And I think this controlled burn, rightly or wrongly, was an effort to keep your town from blowing up. Okay? I'm not saying you're happy about it. I'm not asking you to be happy about it. But the more I read about it, I kind of get the idea. Okay? Now, so we have the controlled burn. Your town looks like a Hiroshima bomb. I talked to a gentleman that rides motorcycles from right here in Columbiana. He said, I'm right outside town here. And I took a photograph straight up. It was over my house. This thing was huge. Okay? I want every one of your photographs taken. I want you to go to your computers. I want you to go to your phones and preserve that evidence. Okay? If you decide to get involved in a lawsuit, you have an affirmative duty to preserve evidence. But this is extremely helpful. And I'll explain why in a little bit. All right. So that happened on the 3rd. Let's talk about what happened after the 3rd. I do want to throw a shout out to the Fire Chief Keith Dravick, to the mayor who I met last Friday, the mayor of East Palestine, Trent Conaway, and frankly, even going up the stream to the governor of Ohio and Pennsylvania. I know that a lot of people are mad at him. This is a bipartisan shout out. As these things happen, the worst thing you can do is not provide information. Okay? I don't know whether the information they're providing you is accurate, but at least they're trying, which is good. The EPA administrator is here. He's trying. I want to give an unusual bipartisan shout out to your 2 United States senators, Sherrod Brown and J.D. Vance, from violently different wings of 2 different political parties, but they're working together on this. And there's a bill that I want to talk to you about in a little bit. But the bottom line is there's action. It should have happened before the fire. I mean, before the derailment. Okay? It damn sure should have. I agree with you. Okay? But if there's one good thing that's going to come out of here is maybe America wakes up and doesn't keep buying into this nonsense from the rail companies that we can't do basic safety things to prevent these things. And so, yep. Okay. So the bottom line is this. While all the politicians are showing up trying to placate everybody, give them information, Norfolk Southern stays on schedule. Remember, they've got to derail a car every 2 or 3 days. So they go up to Michigan and they derail one. And we keep going. Another shout out. 2 citizens of East Palestine took it on themselves, Jessica Conrad and Jim Stewart, last Wednesday, I think. Remember the CNN town hall? They flew to New York. They confronted the CEO and they jumped in his face. And as Mr. Stewart looked at the CEO, he said, "You burned me." The bottom line is this company burned every one of you. Okay? So my message about politics is this, and I try not to bring politics in, but you see it, it's all over this, is whether or not there should have been regulation, whether you agree with the Democrats or the Republicans and say it's too expensive, I don't care. But what I can tell you is, whether that regulation was there or not, Norfolk Southern Railway Company had an affirmative duty to conduct its own affairs, put aside regulation requirements, to conduct its own affairs to prevent the hazard of derailment, and they did not do so. They are legally responsible for what happened to you, as you saw when the EPA has forcibly ordered them to cover all the cleanup costs. Okay? All right. I do a lot of litigation involving transportation things, planes going down and the like, and the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Group, they don't have a reputation of being quick. I've had a bunch of private plane crashes where they seize all the evidence, they put it into a warehouse, and we don't get to see it for a year, and we don't hear a thing until they get around to doing a final report. They do deserve some credit for getting their preliminary report out within 3 weeks to tell us what the hell is going on. And it was a good report, and I agree with most of it, okay? All right. But you're in the middle of a political game of whodunit. Everybody's pointing sideways. This comes from the far side. That I think it's funny. Everybody's saying, shoot at him, okay? And again, I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican, but you've seen it. And again, I want to just warn you about some of the ways that politics is leading to accusations that don't have anything to do with why we're here. Okay? You know, President Trump came in, I guess it was Wednesday last. Good photo op, and frankly, I think they all should come. Okay? So I commend him for coming. But one of the things that he was doing is he was getting eaten up, and then here's the administrator, and then Biden's, tweeting when you should be here, but, whatever, okay? But they're all blaming each other for the lack of regulation. But let me just give you a couple of examples, and I call this a political blame game of musical chairs. When the music of lies stops, the truth is revealed, there won't be enough chairs to go around. Okay? And so let me just kind of give you a little